For this presentation, I'm going to be discussing my framework, which I call the physics of emotioning. Take some of the fundamental concepts from this framework and apply them to an understanding of addiction, habit, compulsion, procrastination, and dependency. The question being, what do these things have in common and/or how are they different? So on the second slide, we get to the question, how is addiction different from the baby and his or her attachment to their blanket or their binky, binky being the slang word for the pacifier, compulsion of various kinds, other bad habits, biting your fingernails, twirling your hair, whatever. There's plenty of other bad habits. Being a slob, you could consider a bad habit. Procrastination, one of those things that bothers so many people in various ways. And psychological dependency, which of course we'll define in some detail in a minute. Some babies really fall in love with their binkies and their blankets, and this is really due to their soothing effects. This is sort of the initial form of psychological dependency that we can experience. And this happens because the use of these things reliably provides comfort or provides them with a sense of safety. They're deriving both a feel-good and a stop-feeling-bad payoff from the use of these things at the same time. So the baby's desire for the object is very strong. The primary effect of using the object is escape from some unwanted experience. In other words, there's agita, agitation, anxiety, upset, and they get soothed and or comforted and or made to feel safe. And that's the relief from the unwanted feelings. Compulsions, likewise, are behaviors that stop the person from feeling bad. The person has a great deal of anxiety or frustration or some vaguer form of upset, and that upset goes away, that anxiety is reduced, whatever, when they engage in the behavior. Sometimes it's not actually reduced that substantially. In other words, they're still left with some of the anxiety, which is why in its severe forms, the compulsion can get ridiculous where it's kind of happening nonstop. And that's because it's relieving the agita, if you will, just a little bit, but not sufficiently, despite regular and repeated use of the behavior. It's not, the use of the behavior is completely about the escape from or relief from some unwanted emotional experience. In other words, they're not really seeking a high, they're just trying to escape a low. The negative reinforcement of anxiety, in other words, the escape behavior is reinforcing. The negative reinforcement of anxiety relief is what makes them crave the effects of engaging in the behavior. The good feeling involved is that feeling of great relief. Habit's a word we use to describe behaviors, behavior patterns that are hard to stop. They're hard to break the habit. Because they've helped the person manage feeling states in important enough ways for a long, long time, done over and over again, even if it's only delivering a kind of minor payoff. This dynamic makes habit a form of psychological dependency. Again, if there was no withdrawal, so to speak, if there was no discomfort at stopping, then we wouldn't call it a habit. Desires and the positive payoffs from a habit vary, but usually with some positive feeling being sought by the person, at least early on in the development of the habit. The mainstay payoff of some low-level and sometimes hard-to-detect relief from some set of bad feelings is still operative, although it may not be so apparent. Sometimes when you're examining a habit or a habit pattern, you have to do a little deeper searching in order to uncover what bad feelings, quote unquote, are being managed. In many cases, it's nothing more than avoiding the withdrawal or the loss pain that giving up the habit would involve. Psychological dependency has to involve some emotional withdrawal symptoms. For example, there's a state of generic uneasiness or anxiety when stopping the drug use or certain behaviors. Take the blanket away from the child and there's kicking and screaming. There's begging. Same with the binky. To the degree that a habit would involve psychological dependency, the same sort of thing. You get antsy, frustrated, agitated, irritable. These are emotional withdrawal symptoms, and we distinguish the emotional withdrawal from the physical withdrawal that gets manifest with chemical dependency and stopping a chemical dependency, stopping a person from actually injecting the alcohol or the drugs, the chemistry of the drugs into their system physically. So the psychological dependency is contrasted with the chemical dependency in reference to habit, or in a pure psychological dependency, you only have the psychological dependency, but when you're talking about addiction to substances, the substance use disorders, that create the mood-altering effect, then you have both the chemical dependency and the psychological dependency. It's important to note that in the case of addiction, the psychological dependency can linger long after the bonds of the chemical dependency have been broken. And this is part of what makes addiction a very difficult behavior pattern to change, because you have both kinds of dependencies. And if the psychological dependency persists and causes a quote-unquote relapse, then it kind of rekindles the chemical dependency, and this is why the person with a slip is so often inclined to turn it into a full-blown relapse. Well, what about procrastination? And how does this compare to the other struggles or issues? Procrastination happens when a person has significant commitments to fear-based avoidance or discomfort avoidance without fully realizing it. The desired outcome, the goal that the person's seeking, finish this task or get to this goal, this at first glance seems to be paramount, or it may even seem to stand all alone as a goal, but there are bad feelings that are attached to the goal pursuit or the goal achievement that escape easy detection. In other words, we don't see them, they're camouflaged. Think of the unspoken fear connected to change uncertainties, like, okay, I say I want this, but will I really like all the changes that come along with it? Or the under-acknowledged desire for something else instead of the stated goal. Well, I think I want to get my graduate degree, but frankly, I'd rather work on the beach and rent out surfboards. But I don't want anybody to know that, including myself. So at this point, we find ourselves asking the question, what do all these forms of dysfunctional volitional behavior have in common? And I'm describing them as volitional on purpose in a very specific way, meaning they are willed. We will these behaviors, we intend these behaviors. They don't necessarily feel in the strictest sense like they're voluntary. And I discuss that in great detail in a couple of other places where I explore the idea of trance and the role that trance phenomena play in addiction, for instance. Okay, so first and foremost, we recognize that there is ambivalence. Every one of these issues, every one of these dysfunctional or troubling patterns involves ambivalence and the challenges that ambivalence presents. Ambivalence means literally ambivalent, or moving in multiple directions at the same time. And when we have mixed motives and mixed feelings, we are being moved in mixed direction at the same time, being pushed and pulled or torn in two, or all the other expressions we use to describe ambivalence. We can also recognize that on some level the negative reinforcement is more potent and more persistent than the element of positive reinforcement. The power of the drive to escape unwanted feeling states or unwanted experience is stronger and more enduring in each of these patterns than the potential payoff of pleasure or good feelings. In addition, the afflicted person has a limited awareness of the specific nature of the payoffs. Most often, people can't tell you what the real positive payoff is. They have some vague notion, but it's not at all clear. And they certainly have limited awareness of the full picture of his or her intentions. They don't know the answer to the question, why? Why do you do that? They have some sort of flimsy fill-in-the-blank explanation. And I relate this, therefore, to a story that they tell, or a story that they sell to others, about the self, about who they are, about what is making them tick, and about what life is to them, what these things might mean to them. And their story is full of holes. And the reason it's full of holes is because they have this limited awareness. These understanding shortfalls apply to both ends, and that means the pursuing of the positive feeling states and the positive outcomes, and the avoiding of or the escaping from the negative feeling states. They don't really clearly understand the upside and the upside dynamics, nor do they understand the downside or the downside dynamics. So regarding the storytelling idea, the person's statements about intention to change are reflective of this limited awareness. For instance, if only the potential positive payoffs are identified and mentioned, it might sound like the person's fully and unilaterally committed to change. I really want to stop this. I really want to end this. I really want to change this. I really, really do. And that's all there is to it. But these declarations are missing important pieces of the motivational puzzle. Makes sense that if your awareness only allows you access to a portion of the relevant motivational forces, then your predictions and your explanations and your expectations for your own behavior will not be accurate. Your story's full of holes because you're lacking important information. The limited awareness of the level of commitment the person has to the escape or to the avoid or to the relief payoff is pretty typical. This leaves the person baffled about their own choices and failures to change. And this befuddlement tends to get worse as the positive payoffs diminish and the failure to change begins to produce greater pain. Kind of exasperated desperation, the person says, I don't know why I don't just quit. I want to. So now we get to the meat and potatoes question about making changes. What's needed to support change efforts then? What helps them be deep and lasting changes? Intention and commitment to change. The baby with the pacifier is not intending to change. It's not the baby's idea. So any change intention has to be provided by the parents or the caretakers from the outside. It's somebody else's idea. It has to be somebody else who engineers the whole process. You don't get anything but resistance and non-cooperation from the baby. Outsiders providing the motivation can work for babies' issues since they have trouble defeating others' efforts. It's a power differential. Outside motivation is less effective for the issues that older children and adults have. And this is because their resistance is so much more formidable. They will put up a fight, and they're able to put up a fight. For the rest of us, the non-babies, what helps with procrastination, addiction, bad habits, compulsions, and dependency is first and foremost enhanced self-awareness. This supports the identification and understanding of elements of the ambivalence profile. And this is key, the level of self-understanding, as we've been suggesting. Since it's low or deficient, for the most part, it needs to be sufficient to empower the person. And this is really the sense in which knowledge or self-knowledge becomes power, and the power to change. In addition, changing the relationship to the unwanted feeling states offers the possibility of a more fundamental and lasting change. So quite simply, what I mean by that is the person changes their default or reflex-based orientation to run away from pain, to manage pain, to a different kind of relationship in which painful things are the source of interest or curiosity first. Not that they're found to be pleasant, but the effort to understand them becomes important rather than just the effort to avoid them. So now we examine the change process from the standpoint of the Lukens method, which is the embodiment of the understanding of the physics of emotion framework. The Lukens method is designed to do both: enhance self-awareness, to help people fully see and come to know their ambivalence in all their various forms, from the gory to the glorious, the good, bad, and the ugly of their commitments, of their feeling states, of their mixed feeling states, and their collection of meanings. Enhance the self-awareness and change the relationship to the unwanted feeling states. For example, from this reflex to avoid to an interest in examining and develop a more full and richer understanding. So think about it, from avoidance more to curiosity and information seeking. It's important to recognize at this stage, we're about at the end of the presentation, that I haven't discussed at all how to go about making these changes, and we'll save that discussion in some greater detail for a future presentation. Thanks for your time and attention.